It began here in this cabin located not far from the cemetery site. This was the cabin of Nancy and Jasper Holmes, some of the early settlers of this area of Coleman County. The dream of a Methodist church began here with Nancy Holmes, and she would not give up until her dream was realized. There were churches in the area in the early 1800s. Enon Baptist Church had been established, and each Sunday families loaded up their wagons or on horseback and went to church. Jasper Holmes was a Baptist, but Nancy had always been a Methodist. Nancy wanted a Methodist church in her community, and she mentioned it often to her husband. Jasper finally agreed to donate 2 acres of land. That was all Nancy needed. In 1884, the first minister was assigned to establish a new congregation. His name was H.P. Berry. A few people first met to organize the new congregation. The 6 charter members were Thomas Holmes, Nancy Holmes, John H. Holmes, Prudy Lawrence, James Lawrence, and Chrissy Ray. They called the church Holmes Chapel. It is believed that the first building was made of logs. In 1890, in what would become a tradition, the church members got together and built a frame building. The cemetery was established beside the first building. The first burial was that of E.H. Morgan in 1893. Jasper Holmes attended church faithfully with his wife, and he was one of its strongest supporters for many years. On their golden wedding anniversary, Jasper joined the church. In 1911, the Reverend W.T. Hamby was assigned as pastor of Holmes Chapel. The people loved Brother Hamby very much. He was a great preacher and a strong leader. It was during his ministry that the group decided to build a new building. Some of the members saw the need to relocate to Eva Road. T.C. and Kitty Holmes donated land, and a new building was completed in 1913. Brother Hamby had worked many hours building the building. Before he left, the group decided to rename the church Hamby's Chapel in his honor. Nancy Holmes died November 28, 1920. Minnie Bonner was one of the most faithful members of the church's history. Many faithful members have passed through the congregation over the many years, and many wonderful traditions have been established. Hamby's Chapel was one of the first churches around to have a Sunday school. Many young people have been influenced through its ministry. Cleo Murphy was one of the most faithful youth leaders in the history of the church. The pastor who has served the most years at Hamby's Chapel was E.M. Dickerson, who was here from 1926 to 1937. Decoration or Homecoming Day was an early tradition. According to Jewel Holmes Rogers, the first Decoration Day was called Children's Day because children were a large part of the program. Helping neighbors is another important tradition. This picture was taken when a group got together to chop cotton for Mr. Lester Gregory when he was sick. Favorite pastor of the 1950s was Milton S. Palmer. James Miller taught Sunday school for more than 20 years before actually moving his membership from the Presbyterian Church, which he did so to show love for his faithful wife, Annie Olson Miller. This is some of the Harold Sanders family. Annie Miller served as church treasurer for 19 years. Early Sunday school sweethearts from the 1950s, Linda Neal and Rodney Holmes. These are some early Sunday school members. No one knows the exact date the Methodist Youth Fellowship was organized, but children and youth have always been an important part of the church. Fun and fellowship prevailed at picnics. These pictures were made at MYF picnics in the early 1950s. The church needed a new building in the early 1950s. This building was built in 1954. John Smith provided much of the building leadership. John and his wife Mitty were faithful members for many years. Charles West was a pastor from 1954 to 1956. He has probably conducted more weddings than any other pastor here. Until the late 1960s, the church was on a four-point circuit with regular services held each second Sunday of the month. Even though the church was not financially well off, some of the faithful members like Leldon Edmondson believed that it was possible to progress to halftime. They agreed to step out on faith, and the two groups at Eva and Hamby's chapel became a charge. Leldon is quoted as having said, when discussing whether the church could afford to pay half the minister's salary instead of a fourth, "If we get in a tight, we'll just have to sell an old cow." The pastor who provided the leadership for this progress was Richard Taylor. The 1970s brought a new era of change and progress. Odie Gregg served here from 1970 to 1973. During this period, a new educational wing was constructed with a first for the church, indoor restrooms. During the construction, the church was robbed. The organ fixtures for the new wing and an altar were taken. The following Sunday, Brother Gregg's sermon was, "Would a Man Rob God?" It was not about the robbery, but about tithing. The determined congregation quickly recovered and bought a new organ. The women held bazaars and other fundraising events. The MYF helped too. In 1973, at the urging of Annie Miller, the group began to plan toward going full-time and building its own parsonage. At an administrative board meeting on June the 24th, 1973, the parsonage committee was elected. The members of the committee were Maurice Bentley, Deckard Edmondson, R. Rita Soden, Joe Osbolt, and Mitchell Taubert. Again, the women worked to raise money for the building fund. Owen Hope served the church from 1974 until his retirement in 1977. He and his wife, True, were very dear and were regarded as permanent members of the church family. It was their wish to be buried at Hamby's Chapel. The first youth trip to Florida was held during Brother Hope's tenure. These are some pictures of the MYF trips to the beach. Church retreats to Camp Simatanga have been an annual tradition. Church picnics were also held. In February 1976, the first senior citizens banquet was held. Invitations were extended to the whole community, and everyone had a great time. In July 1976, the year that our country celebrated its bicentennial, Hamby's Chapel celebrated by having a bicentennial celebration and groundbreaking for the new parsonage. Senator James Allen was the keynote speaker. The women of the church held bazaars to raise money for the parsonage. During this period, Ruby Sanders provided great inspiration to everyone. She had been a faithful member and Sunday school teacher for many years, but she was ill with cancer. In In spite of her illness, she attended church regularly and worked many hours at home making a quilt to be donated to the church. The quilt raised $350 for the parsonage fund, but its real value is beyond measure. Ruby went to be with the Lord in October of 1976, just days after the parsonage construction began, but her dream had been realized. The parsonage was started. Brother Hope retired in June of 1977, and the parsonage was occupied by our first full-time pastor, Bob Bogey. Some special people were honored that year. Jessie Green was named the United Methodist Women as an honorary member in appreciation for his help with their projects. Minerva Johnson was honored as the oldest living member. Bonnie Holmes was honored with a This Is Your Life program. Decoration Day has always been an important event, especially for those who love to eat. Young people never really change. Fun and fellowship prevailed at the Halloween party. Who are these monsters? These are Sunday school classes, some from the 1970s. The first church-wide retreat at Camp Simatonga was held in the fall of 1979. This too has become a tradition. Gary Anders was assigned as pastor in 1980, bringing a parsonage family that are loved by all: Linda, Laurie, and Chris. And that's the way it was until May the 7th, 1982, when a tragic fire destroyed the building we all love so much. We were saddened but determined to start over. Everyone worked together. Plans were made, money was raised, prayers were answered. During this trying period, our Christian friends helped in many ways. The congregation at Eva let us use their church for our services, and we owe them a great debt. Enon Baptist Church hosted our annual Decoration Day services and gave us a generous donation. Unity and Union Hill Baptist Churches sent donation. Eva Methodist Church and Methodist churches all over the state sent love gifts. The first work day to begin the new building was July the 5th, 1982. And we worked and worked. Progress was made. At every work day, the women provided lunch. Gwen and Jerry Bredson's church wedding was held on the cement slab that would become the floor of the new sanctuary. Our charge conference was held in the roughed-in basement in November of 1982. The very first service was Christmas of 1982. It was cold and damp, but not our spirits. By late winter, the basement was ready to be occupied, and we all rejoiced at coming home. The first wedding held in the completed church was that of Keith and Dolores Griffin in 1983. Other weddings have been held since. These are pictures from Jennifer Holmes' wedding to Kenneth Fayok. These are Sunday school class meetings after we moved into our new building.